Alvin Cullum York, also known by his rank as Sergeant York, was one of the most decorated United States Army soldiers of World War I. This is the story of an unsung hero whose incredible encounter with 157 German soldiers defied all expectations and left an indelible mark on the pages of history. In a mere matter of hours, York would rise from anonymity to become a symbol of American valor. This narrative chronicles the life and times of the man known as the real Sergeant York, who will still resonate for generations. In the heart of Fentress County, Tennessee, nestled amidst the rolling hills and dense woodlands, Alvin Cullum York came into this world within the rustic confines of a humble two-room log cabin. He was the third offspring of William Uriah York and Mary Elizabeth York, their roots tracing back to the rich tapestry of Southern heritage. William Uriah York, a native of Jamestown, Tennessee, bore the lineage of Uriah York and Eliza Jane Livingston, who had migrated from the verdant lands of Buncombe County, North Carolina. Mary Elizabeth York, hailing from Pall Mall, carried the blood of William Brooks, who had assumed his mother's maiden name as the pseudonym William H. Harrington after his valiant service in Company A of the 11th Michigan Cavalry Regiment during the tumultuous American Civil War. Mary's mother was Nancy Pyle, and she could trace her ancestry to Conrad Coonrod Pyle, an English pioneer who had carved a life in the fertile soil of Pall Mall, Tennessee. The bonds of matrimony united William York and Mary Brooks on the auspicious day of December 25, 1881, and their union bore the fruit of 11 children: Henry Singleton, Joseph Marion, Alvin Cullum, Samuel John, Albert, Hattie, George Alexander, James Preston, Lillian May, Robert Daniel, and Lucy Irma. The York family's lineage primarily flowed with English blood, tinged ever so slightly with the proud spirit of Scotch-Irish ancestry. Their home was nestled in the serene embrace of the Indian Creek region of Fentress County, a land that, though picturesque, often imposed the weight of poverty upon their shoulders. To sustain their modest livelihood, William York toiled as a blacksmith, the clang of his hammer resonating through the quiet countryside. The York men, meanwhile, toiled the land, cultivating and harvesting their own sustenance. In the quiet solitude of their homestead, Mary York's nimble fingers wove the fabric of their lives, crafting all the clothing for the brood that filled their humble abode. Education was a fleeting luxury for the York sons, who spent a mere 9 months in its embrace. The demands of the family farm, the call of the hunt, and the necessity of fishing for sustenance beckoned them away from the schoolhouse. In the wake of William York's departure from this world in November of 1911, it fell upon the shoulders of young Alvin to help his mother raise their younger siblings. As the oldest son remaining in the county, he bore the weight of responsibility. In a bid to supplement the family's meager income, Alvin York ventured beyond their county's boundaries, making his way to Harriman, Tennessee. His endeavors led him first into the demanding realm of railroad construction, where he honed his skills as a laborer. Subsequently, he found his niche as a logger, displaying a knack for the demanding work of timber. Accounts of his abilities painted him as a dedicated provider, unwavering in his commitment to his family, and a marksman with unparalleled skill. However, this man of many talents carried within him a dark shadow. Alvin York was also known as a volatile alcoholic, often entangled in saloon brawls that marred his reputation. Tragedy struck during one such altercation, resulting in the death of his closest friend. In addition, York accumulated a series of arrests, leaving a trail of notoriety in his wake. It was a turbulent path that his mother, a member of the pacifist Protestant denomination, fervently hoped he would one day abandon in favor of a more virtuous life. In spite of his turbulent past, Alvin York remained a steadfast attendee of church services, where he often found himself leading the congregation in hymn singing. It was during a revival meeting toward the end of 1914 that a profound transformation took hold of him, leading to a life-altering conversion experience on January 1st, 1915. His spiritual haven was the Church of Christ in Christian Union, a Protestant denomination firmly grounded in principles that eschewed secular politics and sought to heal the rifts between Christian denominations. While the church had no specific doctrine of pacifism, its inception had been a reaction to the Methodist Episcopal Church, South's support of slavery and armed conflict during the American Civil War. Thus, York would later recount his apprehension at the outbreak of World War I, expressing his deep-seated reluctance to take up arms. "I was worried clean through. I didn't want to go and kill. I believed in my Bible." On June 5, 1917, at the age of 29, Alvin York dutifully registered for the draft, a requirement binding all men aged 21 to 30 under the Selective Service Act. In response to the query, "Do you claim exemption from draft? Specify grounds," he inscribed, "Yes, don't want to fight." Despite his initial plea for conscientious objector status being rebuffed, York persisted in his appeal. It's worth noting that during World War I, conscientious objectors were not exempt from military service, but were assigned roles that did not conflict with their anti-war convictions. As his application was still under review, York was drafted in November 1917 and commenced his Army service at Camp Gordon, Georgia. Throughout the period from his draft registration to his return from the war on May 29, 1919, York meticulously maintained a diary chronicling his experiences. In his journal, he revealed his reluctance to endorse documents prepared by his pastor, seeking his discharge from the Army on religious grounds, as well as similar documents furnished by his mother, which claimed exemption based on his status as the sole provider for her and his siblings. Despite his initial request for exemption, he later disavowed any affiliation with conscientious objection. His military journey began as a member of Company G, 328th Infantry, 82nd Division. Plagued by a profound inner conflict between his pacifist beliefs and the rigorous military training he underwent, York engaged in earnest conversations with his company commander, Captain Edward Courtney Bullock, Danforth, Jr., of Augusta, Georgia, and his battalion commander, Major G. Edward Buxton of Providence, Rhode Island, a devout Christian himself. Danforth persuaded York to reevaluate his stance on participating in the war. After being granted a 10-day leave to visit his home, York returned with a newfound conviction that he was meant to fight and believed that God would protect him in his mission, just as he had once been committed to pacifism. With his renewed sense of purpose, he went on to serve with valor during the Meuse-Argonne Offensive. On that fateful October 8, 1918, amidst the throes of the Meuse-Argonne Offensive, Alvin York's battalion embarked on a daring mission. Their objective, to seize German positions near Hill 223, perched along the Decauville Railroad to the north of Châtel-Chehery, France. It was during this harrowing encounter that York's valor would earn him the prestigious Medal of Honor, an accolade that would etch his name into the annals of history. Recollections of that day would forever echo in his mind. The German forces proved formidable, their concealed machine guns raining a relentless storm of bullets upon the American troops. The peril was undeniable as their ranks dwindled under the unyielding onslaught. The valley lay before them, a treacherous expanse, while death rained down from above. Under the command of Acting Sergeant Bernard Early, a small band of non-commissioned officers, including Acting Corporal York, and a mere handful of privates received a daring directive: infiltrate enemy lines and eliminate the menacing machine guns. Sneaking behind the unsuspecting Germans, they stumbled upon the headquarters of a German unit, capturing a significant number of enemy soldiers who were poised for a counterattack. But as fate would have it, a hail of German machine gun fire erupted without warning, claiming the lives of 6 Americans and wounding 3 others. Amidst the chaos, some of the Americans retaliated while others guarded their captives. From his vantage point, York engaged the enemy with unwavering determination. The scene was nothing short of chaotic, with machine guns spewing fire and the undergrowth splintering under the relentless assault. The cacophony of German orders and the deafening turmoil filled the air. In the midst of it all, York found himself devoid of cover, unable to seek refuge behind a tree or dive into the brush. He had no choice but to confront the enemy head-on. And so, with over 30 German adversaries relentlessly firing upon him, he reciprocated in kind. It was a deadly game of sharpshooting, a relentless exchange of fire. With every pull of the trigger, he yelled at the Germans to surrender, a desperate plea to avoid further bloodshed. He had no desire to take more lives than necessary, but it was a matter of survival, a stark choice between them and him. As the battle raged on, a German officer, First Lieutenant Paul Jürgen Vollmer, leading his beleaguered compatriots, emptied his pistol in a futile attempt to subdue York. Yet the relentless American soldier remained unscathed, and the toll on the German ranks grew ever more unbearable. In an unexpected turn, Vollmer offered his surrender in broken English to York, who, in a testament to the chaos and absurdity of war, accepted. After the dust had settled, York and his 7 comrades led their captured German prisoners back to the American lines, a scene that defied the odds and left a lasting impression. Upon reuniting with his unit, York reported to his brigade commander, Brigadier General Julian Robert Lindsay, who, with a touch of humor, quipped, "Well, York, I hear you have captured the whole German army." To which York, ever humble, replied, "No, sir. I only got 132. York's extraordinary actions had silenced the menacing German machine guns, opening the door for the 328th Infantry to resume their advance and capture the Decauville Railroad. In swift recognition of his valor, York was swiftly promoted to the rank of sergeant and bestowed with the Distinguished Service Cross. A few months later, following an investigation by his chain of command, his Distinguished Service Cross was upgraded to the esteemed Medal of Honor. The medal was presented by none other than General John J. Pershing, the commanding general of the American Expeditionary Forces. In addition to these American honors, the French Republic bestowed upon him the Croix de Guerre, Médaille Militaire, and the Legion of Honor, commemorating his heroic deeds. Not to be outdone, Italy awarded him with the Croce al Merito di Guerra, while Montenegro adorned him with its war medal. In the end, Alvin York found himself the recipient of nearly 50 decorations, a testament to his exceptional courage and unwavering resolve. The official citation for York's Medal of Honor would forever encapsulate his incredible feat, stating that he had fearlessly led 7 men to take down a machine gun nest, capturing not just the weaponry but also 4 officers, 128 soldiers, and several guns. Yet, amidst the accolades and commendations, York offered a humble explanation for his actions during the 1919 investigation. He confided to General Lindsay, "A higher power than man guided and watched over me and told me what to do." To this, Lindsay simply replied, "York, you are right." The tale of Alvin York's heroism initially garnered little public attention. However, it was the vivid account penned by Saturday Evening Post correspondent George Patullo, titled "The Second Elder Gives Battle," published on April 26, 1919, that catapulted him to the national spotlight. In a moment when the nation embraced the idea of the war as a divine crusade, York's assertion that God had guided him during the battle resonated deeply with the American public. He returned to the United States in the spring of 1919 to a jubilant welcome and a deluge of business opportunities as people sought to capitalize on his newfound fame. Before departing from France, Alvin York assumed the role of his division's non-commissioned officer delegate during the formation of the American Legion, an organization of which he was a founding member. His astounding bravery, however, went largely unnoticed by the American press, even in his home state of Tennessee. That is, until the April 26, 1919 edition of the Saturday Evening Post hit the stands, capturing the nation's attention with a circulation surpassing 2 million readers. In an article entitled "The Second Elder Gives Battle," journalist George Patullo, who had stumbled upon York's remarkable tale while touring battlefields earlier that year, painted a vivid portrait. The story highlighted York's Appalachian roots, his unwavering faith, his marksmanship prowess, and his simple, unassuming demeanor. It portrayed him as a patriot who embodied the heart and soul of America, a man who seemed to instinctively do everything right. The news of York's exploits spurred the Tennessee Society, a group of Tennessee residents living in New York City, to organize grand celebrations for his homecoming. A 5-day furlough allowed him to visit the bustling cities of New York and Washington, D.C. Upon his arrival in Hoboken, New Jersey on May 22nd, he was greeted with open arms. He stayed at the prestigious Waldorf Astoria and attended a formal banquet held in his honor. York even embarked on a special tour of the city's subway system in a dedicated car before proceeding to Washington. In the nation's capital, he received a standing ovation from the House of Representatives and had the honor of meeting Secretary of War Newton D. Baker, as President Woodrow Wilson was still overseas in Paris. From there, York made his way to Fort Oglethorpe, Georgia, where he was honorably discharged from military service. Finally, he returned to his beloved Tennessee for more jubilant celebrations. Yet the festivities were far from over. On June 7, 1919, just days after his return, Alvin York and Gracie Loretta Williams exchanged vows in a ceremony officiated by Tennessee Governor Albert H. Roberts in Pall Mall. The joyous occasion was followed by further celebrations, including a week-long excursion to Nashville, where York received a special medal bestowed by the state. Despite numerous lucrative offers that came his way, York staunchly refused to profit from his newfound fame. He turned down substantial sums for appearances, product endorsements, newspaper articles, and the rights to his life story for the silver screen. Instead, he lent his name and support to various charitable and civic endeavors. In a bid to bolster economic development in his homeland, York championed the construction of a road connecting his native region. His efforts bore fruit when the Mountain Highway was completed in the mid-1920s, christened the Alvin C. York Highway in his honor. The Nashville Rotary, in a gesture of gratitude, orchestrated the purchase of a 400-acre farm for York through public subscription. However, the reality of the gift didn't quite match the promise, requiring York to secure loans for its stocking. Unfortunately, he found himself in financial turmoil as he grappled with the agricultural depression that followed the war. To compound his woes, the Rotary Club faced financial difficulties and could no longer make installment payments on the property, leaving York to shoulder the burden alone. In 1921, he had little choice but to seek public assistance, a move that thrust his financial affairs into the public eye, attracting some sharp criticism. The burden of debt weighed heavily on him, leading him to reflect, "I could get used to most any kind of hardship, but I'm not fitted for the hardship of owing money." In the end, it was only through a nationwide appeal to Rotary clubs and a feature in the New York World that required contributions arrived. just in time for Christmas in 1921. In the 1920s, Alvin York embarked on a noble endeavor by establishing the Alvin C. York Foundation, driven by a heartfelt mission to expand educational opportunities within his Tennessee homeland. Notable figures like Congressman Cordell Hull, who would later ascend to the role of Secretary of State under President Franklin D. Roosevelt, and Secretary of the Treasury William G. McAdoo, President Wilson's son-in-law, joined the foundation's board. Tennessee Governor Albert Roberts also lent his support to this noble cause. The foundation's vision revolved around creating a non-sectarian institution known as the York Agricultural Institute, focused on providing vocational education. York's primary role was fundraising, although he often left audiences disappointed when he chose to discuss the Argonne sparingly, emphasizing, "I occupied one space in a 50-mile front. I saw so little it hardly seems worthwhile discussing it. I'm trying to forget the war in the interest of the mountain boys and girls that I grew up among." However, challenges loomed on the horizon. The battle for financial support from both state and county proved to be a protracted one. Furthermore, York found himself locked in disputes with local leaders regarding the Institute's location. Refusing to compromise on his principles, he eventually resigned and embarked on developing an alternative institution, the York Industrial School. After navigating a series of legal battles, he ultimately gained control of the original establishment and assumed the role of its president when it finally opened its doors in December 1929. As the shadow of the Great Depression darkened the nation, the state government faltered in delivering promised funds. York, undeterred by financial woes, mortgaged his farm to ensure that students had transportation via bus. Even after being ousted from his role as president in 1936 due to political and bureaucratic rivalries, he continued to generously contribute his own resources. In 1935, sensing that his time with the Institute was drawing to a close, York transitioned to the role of project superintendent with the Civilian Conservation Corps. His mission was overseeing the construction of Bird Lake at Cumberland Mountain State Park, a monumental masonry project and one of the largest undertaken by the program. York served as the park superintendent until 1940. During the latter half of the 1930s and the early 1940s, as the world stood on the brink of World War II, York emerged as a powerful advocate for interventionism. He fervently called for U.S. involvement in the war against Germany, Italy, and Japan, despite the prevailing sentiment of isolationism and non-interventionism in the United States. His unpopular stance earned him accusations of warmongering, yet he remained a rare high-profile public voice in favor of intervention. In a poignant speech at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier in May 1941, York passionately declared, "We must fight again. The time is not now ripe, nor will it ever be, to compromise with Hitler or the things he stands for." President Roosevelt himself was captivated by York's words, frequently quoting him, particularly a passage from York's Tomb of the Unknown Soldier speech. With the outbreak of World War II, York sought to re-enlist in the Army, but at the age of 54, overweight, and facing evidence of arthritis and near diabetes, he was denied combat service. Instead, he received a commission as a major in the Army Signal Corps. Undeterred, he toured training camps and participated in bond drives to support the war effort, often covering his own travel expenses. General Matthew Ridgway would later recall that York instilled in the minds of farm boys and clerks the belief that a well-trained and well-armed soldier could overcome any challenge. He also raised funds for war-related charities, including the Red Cross, and served on his county draft board. In a remarkable offer, when literacy requirements led to the rejection of numerous Fentress County men, York volunteered to lead a battalion of illiterate soldiers confident in their marksmanship skills. Despite his roles during the war as a Signal Corps major and later as a colonel with the 7th Regiment of the Tennessee State Guard, newspapers continued to affectionately refer to him as Sergeant York. Alvin York's personal life. Alvin York and his beloved wife Gracie were blessed with a family of 10 children, comprising 7 sons and 3 daughters, many of whom bore the names of prominent figures from American history. Throughout his life, York faced persistent health challenges. In the late 1920s, he underwent gallbladder surgery, and in 1942, he battled pneumonia. Originally described in 1919 as a red-haired giant with the ruddy complexion of the outdoors, standing tall at over 6 feet and weighing more than 200 pounds, by 1945, he had tipped the scales at 250 pounds. In 1948, he suffered a stroke, marking the beginning of a series of health setbacks that included more strokes and another bout of pneumonia. By 1954, he found himself confined to his bed, further burdened by failing eyesight. Frequent hospitalizations followed during his last 2 years. On September 2, 1964, at the age of 76, Alvin York departed this world, succumbing to a cerebral hemorrhage while residing at the Veterans Hospital in Nashville, Tennessee. His passing marked the end of an era. Following a poignant funeral service in his Jamestown church, where General Matthew Ridgway represented President Lyndon Johnson, York was laid to rest at the Wolf River Cemetery in Pall Mall. The Reverend Richard G. Humble, General Superintendent of the Churches of Christ in Christian Union, delivered his funeral sermon. Remarkably, Humble would also go on to preach at Mrs. York's funeral in 1984. While the nation mourned the loss of this iconic hero, doubts and controversies arose concerning the events detailed in his Medal of Honor documents. Some questioned whether they had unfolded precisely as officially described and whether other soldiers in York's unit were equally deserving of recognition for their acts of heroism. Figures like Otis Merrithew, William Cutting, and Bernard Early were among those who contested the official narrative. Out of the 17 American soldiers who had participated in York's Medal of Honor action, 6 had made the ultimate sacrifice. While York received the Medal of Honor over the years, 3 others who had survived that fateful day received Valor Awards, including the Distinguished Service Cross for Early in 1929 and the Silver Star for Merrithew in 1965. However, bureaucratic hurdles and conflicts of interest hindered the efforts of the remaining soldiers to receive the recognition they rightfully deserved. Later in life, General Lindsay experienced a change of heart, supporting the claims of the other men for recognition. However, their aspirations were repeatedly thwarted by military officials, citing a 1929 cutoff date for recommendations. In 1928, York's record became a subject of controversy in Germany after a Swedish journal published an article about his exploits, which some Germans perceived as a slight to the honor of the German armed forces. In response, the Reichsarchiv launched an investigation in 1929, delving into York's battlefield actions. They reviewed military records and interviewed surviving German officers from the 2nd Württemberg Landwehr Division, who had faced York on that fateful day. The German report, though not publicly released at the time, offered a balanced assessment. It acknowledged York as a brave and fearless soldier and confirmed the official U.S. Army report on his actions as factual. However, it also noted that some details in York's initial battlefield report had been grossly exaggerated. For instance, the investigators found that York's unit had likely captured fewer than 132 prisoners and 35 machine guns, as German records indicated the loss of only 79 prisoners in that sector on that day, with fewer than 35 machine guns present. The German investigators shared their findings with the U.S. Army, which, having affirmed York's courageous role in leading assaults on German positions, took no further action. The specifics of York's Medal of Honor citation remained unchallenged, securing his enduring legacy as a true American hero. Goodbye, Sergeant Alvin York.